Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I am very excited to share with you the books that I read in the months of March and April. Yes, this is a bit belated. Welcome to my channel. But I think I read some really great books in these spring months of March and April, and I can't wait to discuss them with you. So let's get into the books. One of the books that I read in the month of March was Malibu Rising by Jenkins Reid. Jenkins Reid is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. She tackles what I consider a rather unique theme in literature, which is the concept of fame and celebrity and the way it impacts people's lives. And she just has this way of writing relationships between characters like no one I've ever read before. I thought this book was just brilliant, not really because of the plot, but because of the way she wrote it and wove the different elements of the narrative together. Malibu Rising takes place in Malibu in the 1980s and follows the four Riva siblings in the 24 hours leading up to their annual end-of-summer party. Interspersed throughout the 80s narrative, we're taken back to the 1950s, and we get to see the history of the family, how the characters' parents, Mick Riva and June, met, and bits about the characters' childhoods, how they grew up, how they all learned to surf, and really how they became the people they are in the 1980s timeline. Jenkins Reid takes all of these little pieces and themes, such as fire and water, surfing, parenthood, fate and fame, and so much more, and she weaves it into this really beautifully executed piece of historical fiction. I keep calling it historical fiction because that's how it's been marketed, but it feels very modern and very strange for me to think of the 80s as some historical time period. But what constitutes historical fiction is really a conversation for a different time, and you can have your own opinions on that. I've honestly put off this wrap-up for quite a while because this book was so fantastic, and I felt like I needed time to process it and figure out how to convey my reading experience to you guys properly. And I really don't think I've done that, but that's okay. It just has such wonderful, summery, beachy vibes to it, and I highly, highly recommend it for the summer months. I want to leave you with a quote that I really like from the mother June, reflecting on motherhood and on raising children. She thought of her children like the Magic Grow capsules you got at the gift shops at the Science Museum. These tiny little nothings that you drop into water and then watch as they slowly reveal what they were always destined to be. This one a Stegosaurus, this one a T-Rex, except instead it was watching them become dependable or talented or kind or daring. In March, I also read Pride by Ibi Zuboi. It's a truth universally acknowledged that when rich people move into the hood, where it's a little bit broken and a little bit forgotten, the first thing they want to do is clean it up. But it's not just the junky stuff they'll get rid of. People can be thrown away too, like last night's trash, left out on sidewalks or pushed to the edge of wherever all broken things go. What those rich people don't always know is that broken and forgotten neighborhoods were first built out of love. That's the opening lines of this fantastic, clever Pride and Prejudice retelling. I'm not usually the biggest fan of Jane Austen retellings. I read plenty of them, but I find that while they add insight to the original text, they rarely stand out on their own. Pride is different though. It's this memorable, solid story in its own right. But of course, if you're familiar with Pride and Prejudice, there's also this whole new depth to the text. Instead of Lizzie Bennet, we follow Zuri Benitez, a Haitian Dominican teen living in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Things in Zuri's neighborhood are already beginning to change, but then Darius Darcy and his wealthy family move into the neighborhood and turn the crumbling house across the street into a mini mansion. And Zuri is more directly confronted by the implications of gentrification that's already going on in the neighborhood. This book really cleverly modernizes Austen's novel by replacing the standard marriage plot of Pride and Prejudice with a coming-of-age story, and it works really effectively. This book really cleverly modernizes Austen's novel by replacing the standard marriage plot of Pride and Prejudice with a coming-of-age story, and it works really effectively. The Regency marriage market is replaced by the modern teenage dating world and the anxieties of preparing for college. And the strict Regency class hierarchy is replaced by an intriguing look into gentrification and its implications on race and class, specifically how wealth and socioeconomic status can cause divisions within race. Little details of Zuri's life cleverly tie back to Pride and Prejudice. Like, I love the way the character of Colin is handled, especially since Mr. Collins's desire to marry a Bennet daughter and the whole concept of the entail on Longbourn isn't so easily applicable to modern-day teens. And the fact that Kitty and Lydia Bennet become boy-crazy twins named Kayla and Layla is wonderful as well. There are just so many intricacies of how this modernized version stays true to the original spirit, and it's just lovely. It's quite possible, actually, that this is my favorite Pride and Prejudice retelling at the moment, and that's saying something because there are a lot of Pride and Prejudice retellings out there. I would love to know your thoughts on this book, and even if you haven't read it, what are some of your favorite Jane Austen modernizations or retellings? In March, I also reread an old favorite of mine, Matilda by Roald Dahl. I loved this book when I was a child, and I had such fond memories of it that I decided to reread it. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and Kate Winslet just did a phenomenal job bringing these characters to life. Just like when I was a child, I was taken in utterly and completely with the story. I fell in love with Matilda and Miss Honey. Matilda is this exceptionally talented and bright girl, basically a child prodigy who isn't properly understood or encouraged by her parents. I'm amazed at how self-motivated she is and how she discovers ways to garner support from those outside her immediate family. And Miss Honey is brave and kind and dedicated despite her incredibly difficult circumstances. This time around, I was really struck by how differently I approached Matilda as a child. The bookworm and the inner child in me both identify with Matilda, but as an adult, there's a lot more to this book that I latched onto. The reader is supposed to find Matilda endearing and sympathetic, and I still do to some extent, but I'm also appalled by her warped sense of justice and morality. She clearly has never heard the saying, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, or something like two wrongs don't make a right. The adults in this book, naturally with the exception of Miss Honey, of course, treat children horrifically and in many cases should probably be brought up on charges of child abuse. But that really shouldn't excuse the crazy pranks and things that Matilda does to punish them. Matilda's a hard character to wrap your head around in some ways. Miss Honey even says that she's like an adult in a child's body. She seems so fully formed and so sure of herself in a way that most children don't. And frankly, it's astounding that she's so unaffected by her parents' attitudes and habits. Still, the message that one can always find refuge in books is such a powerful one, and I really, really did enjoy this reread. In these spring months, I also read The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. Bridget Collins' other book, The Binding, was tied for my favorite book of last year, along with Natasha Pulley's book, The Kingdoms. So I was very, very excited to read this one. The Betrayals is actually supposed to be a feminist retelling or adaptation of Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game, which I haven't read in its entirety, but before starting The Betrayals, I toyed with the idea of reading it. I took it out from the library, and I even read the first chapter, but I just decided that it wasn't the right time for that book, and so I dove straight into The Betrayals instead. The Betrayals is about the character of Leo Martin, who was once a student at Montvert, which is this exclusive remote academy where people devote their lives to the study of the national game called the Grand Jeu. The game is sort of an abstract concept that even characters in the book struggle to understand. The book makes it clear that the grand jeu is something that's hard to fully grasp unless you're actually playing it, but my understanding is that it's this synthesis of all sorts of academic subject matter, like literature, math, music, and art, and it's governed by strict rules and traditions that we're never really privy to. In essence, the grand jeu is this approximation of the creative process and the way the mind works and makes intimate connections between themes across different disciplines, kind of how the mind threads different themes together to create high academia. I think this whole concept of the grand jeu, or the game, actually comes from Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game. But anyway, we follow the main character, Leo, who many years ago lost his passion for the game and left Montfair. Now his political career is in shambles, and the government party that he works for forces him to retreat from the world and return to Montfair and devote his life to studying the grand jeu. His return to Montfair, and especially his relationship with Claire, the first woman to hold the highest, most prestigious position at Montfair, brings back memories of his time as a student there and unearths all sorts of secrets and tensions. I loved the world building of this book, and I was interested in learning more about Montfair as an institution and the various characters. I thought it tackled themes of memory and grief and guilt in really interesting ways, and I loved how it examined the tensions between politics and academia. The politics in this book reminded me of an alternate version of the 1930s and the rise of the Nazis in Germany, except the book Germany is actually France, and the Nazi-like political group is simply called the Party. It's a fascinating look at nationalism and fascism and its relationship to academia. I do have some mixed feelings about the Betrayals, though, specifically regarding the ending. I thought it left things on a very open-ended note. As readers, we come to understand the relationships between all of the characters and develop a reverence for the game and the world, and the ending just leaves us with this sense of uncertainty and unease for all of these things that we come to care about. It's not necessarily bad, but that uneasy feeling isn't comfortable, and it wasn't the way that I had hoped the book would end. I thought this book was really well written. Bridget Collins plays her own version of the grand jeu in weaving this narrative together. But for me, it will never be as near and dear to my heart or as structurally solid as The Binding. Both books are beautifully written and captivating and have fascinating plot twists, but the haunting sense of unease I got from the Betrayals and the bizarre nature of this plot twist make it fall just shy of perfect for me. Plus, The Binding is about books and literature, and it takes place in an alternate Victorian era, whereas The Betrayals is about academia and an alternate 1920s, 30s time period. So based on just my personal interests, The Binding will be superior every time. This was still an absolutely amazing read, though, and I'm probably going to read everything that Bridget Collins continues to write. Speaking of, is anyone familiar with the books that she wrote as B.R. Collins? I think that they're more YA, is what I heard, but do you know if they're worth a read, especially since I love The Bindings and The Betrayal so much? Please do let me know in the comments down below, because I love Bridget Collins, and I'm wondering if I would like her alternate persona, B.R. Collins. So in April, I surprised myself and I binged the first 5 Bridgerton books on audiobook. I know, I did not think I'd enjoy these at all. If you've been around my channel for a while, you know I do not usually read things that would be considered part of the romance genre, but there is so much hype around the Netflix show, and people in my everyday life told me that they think I really like the TV show. But I decided I didn't want to watch the Bridgerton TV show without first reading at least the first book. So I was halfway through the first Bridgerton book, The Duke and I tried to watch the Netflix series. I feel like this is a really unpopular opinion, but it took me a total of 5 minutes to decide that I had absolutely zero interest in watching the TV show. I was actually really turned off by the main character, Daphne. She's so different on screen than I envisioned her to be in the book. The Daphne in the book would never be so excited about new dresses or care to be properly introduced to the Queen. Daphne in the book really struck me as more of a Lizzie Bennet character with a witty, edgier side to her. So I decided to not watch the Bridgerton TV show pretty quickly. The books, though, are like candy to me. I devour them. My favorite part of these books is really the characters. I am such a sucker for books about big, close-knit families, and the Bridgertons are truly a wonderful family. There's the mother Violet, a viscountess and widower, whose main mission is to raise and find suitable marriages for her 8 children, who she really charmingly has named in alphabetical order A through H. There's Anthony, Benedict, Colin, Daphne, Eloise, Francesca, Gregory, and Hyacinth. And each book in the series functions as a marriage plot for one of the children. The first book, The Duke and I, focuses on Daphne. I love how, as a reader, you are exposed to the characters in their siblings' books, but when you read the book that's devoted to that particular character, you learn so much more about their inner workings and gain a whole new perspective of them. It's fun to reconcile your perceptions of characters from previous books with a narrative devoted to that particular sibling. I also really enjoy how each book comments on themes from the time period in unique ways. Pretty much all of the books discuss class, parenthood, and female sexuality, but each book has its own set of themes that it explores as well. I love how these books show us marriage too. So many books that are written in the Regency or Victorian era are marriage plots that end in marriage, but go no further. The Bridgerton books are about finding suitable marriages, yes, but they also explore what it means to actually be married, and they give us a glimpse of married life. As much as I enjoy these books, I don't think that they're great literature, and I think if I tried to read them in print, I'd find the writing to be too trite and too cliche to stomach. Listening to them on audiobook, though, I can just, cringe at certain moments and turns of phrase and move forwards. Rosalind Landor narrates the whole series, and I have since fallen in love with her as an audiobook narrator. I actually started reading other things by her since the Bridgerton series. I am currently reading Death at Pemberley on audiobook, and Rosalind Landor narrates that as well. But I have to say, if I hear the use of the word need used in a sexual manner and contrasted with desire, or the phrase devilish smile, or devil may care, or it was a prayer and a benediction, I might scream. Sadly, at least one scene per Bridgerton book reads like bad porn. Listening to these books in such close succession makes me realize how similar the intimate scenes all are. And I just laugh at them and roll my eyes and move past them. There really may be a part of me that thinks that sex can't be written well. These books are also not the most historically accurate. It's not just little details, but in many cases, these books seem to thrust Victorian attitudes and mentalities onto the Regency era. I kind of like spotting when this might be happening or when something isn't really accurate, but these books might spread some misinformation about the early 1800s if you're not really familiar with the time period. And it might annoy you a lot if you are familiar with the time period. I could see it going that way as well. But for as much as I love to complain, I keep reading these books. They're kind of addictive, and I do love the Bridgerton family. And I really relish how they make me think about 19th century themes in new ways. I can't decide, but I might do a whole video about this series, if you're interested, where I talk more in depth about some of the specific books. Please do let me know if you'd like that. And if you're interested, hopefully I can recall all of my thoughts from books 1 to 3 and book 5, because I seem to have only taken notes about books 4 and 6 in my reading journal. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but this month I actually read book 6. So I read books 1 through 5 in March and April. I gave it a little break, and then I picked it up again with book 6. So far, I haven't had the temptation to move on to book 7, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point I just finished the whole series. And then last but not least, I did indeed read and finish Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel in the month of April. This is the second book in the Wolf Hall trilogy by Hilary Mantel. This book chronicles the fall of Anne Boleyn as seen from Thomas Cromwell's point of view. This book was really haunting, especially the second half, which just took off like a runaway train. I actually read most of this book in one sitting, which is kind of crazy because it's 400 pages or so. As always, I love how Hilary Mantel writes these books with the understanding that we already know the plot because we know history. There are no spoilers, it is simply history, but it's fun to see how she uses dramatic irony and foreshadows what we already know will happen. I thought that this book did an interesting job of comparing and contrasting Anne Boleyn to both the characters of Thomas Cromwell and Jane Seymour, who slowly gains power as Anne loses hers. Even though this was a bit of an easier read than Wolf Hall, I still feel like the writing was dense and obtrusive. I did notice that Hilary Mantel changed her writing style ever so slightly, probably listening to critiques of Wolf Hall. She did implement names along with the word he to make it clearer as to who was speaking. That was a really big critique of the writing in Wolf Hall, like I said, not just for me, but others as well. And I appreciated the additional clarity, but these books just still aren't the easiest reads for me. If you want to hear more about my thoughts from Wolf Hall, I did that in one of my wrap-up videos. I'll link it below. And I also had an entire discussion with Tori and Emily. There are a lot of interesting details to explore in this book though, and hopefully I will get to do that soon with Tori from Hufflepuff Discovery and Emily from Novel Novels. We are currently having some scheduling issues. I think we have finally sorted them though, so hopefully we will have our Zoom chat before they finish The Mirror and the Light. Personally, I think I might have decided to not read The Mirror and the Light. At least not now, and not with the group. If you want, you can try to convince me otherwise in the comment, but I am kind of sick of the tutors already. I might read The Mirror and the Light eventually, but I just don't think that this is the right time for me with everything going on in my life and the kinds of books that I'm in the mood for right now. I feel like I just need something a little lighter or a little more easy for me to read. I also DNF'd 2 books in the months of March and April, and those were Catch-22 and Alison Weir's book about Catherine of Aragon called The True Queen. I just realized that I don't talk much about the books that I DNF on this channel. I usually don't even mention them, and in most cases, I don't think I really want to. It's almost always a story of wrong book at the wrong time, or I just got sick of the subject matter or the tone, etc. It doesn't even mean that they're bad books or that I'll never pick them up again. I was listening to both of these on audiobook, and I actually was really enjoying them until I got sick of them. So yes, I don't really want to elaborate more on that, but maybe I should actually do a whole video about DNFing, because I have in the past talked about how I want to DNF more books, and I think I'm finally actually doing that. It's taken me a few years, but in my reading life, I'm DNFing a lot more and a lot more quickly. The only reason I mentioned these 2 books this month was because I didn't DNF them so quickly. I read half of Catch-22 and I read a good quarter of Alison Weir's book. So I felt like I should say I read some more things, but also I'm not going to finish those, at least not now. So anyway, that's it for my March and April wrap up. What books did you guys enjoy in the months of March and April? Or which books are you enjoying currently, I guess, because that was kind of a while ago at this point. What are your thoughts on any of the books I discussed? Are you a Bridgerton fan of the books or the TV show or both? What guilty pleasure reads do you have? Because I guess Bridgerton is a guilty pleasure read for me. Have you read The Glass Bead Game as well as The Betrayals? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts on the two books together. And is anyone familiar with the works that Bridget Collins wrote as B.R. Collins? Because I'm interested in that as well. Please let me know all of your thoughts about these books and authors and other things in the comment section down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all in another video very soon. Bye!